Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure. Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the first season of Secrets of the C-Suite. This is a special episode because it's Susan and I again talking to each other, and we're going to be talking about what we learned in this season and give you a little preview of season 2 and a couple other tidbits. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Juliet. Good morning.
Good morning to you. It's a Sunday morning, and we're both a little fuzzy. But that's okay. We're showing up. We're showing up.
That's something we learned this season, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
Before we dive in, you and I had it's a theme actually for this whole season, is this notion of particularly female leaders apologizing.
Yes.
Apologizing too much. And as you like to say, sorry, not sorry.
Exactly. I'm actually have a client right now that is an over apologizer, and I don't even want to go into the psychology of why women say they're sorry all the time, or feel like that's how you start a sentence. But this has been an obsession of mine for many years, and I'd say about 5 years ago, I decided to put a conscious effort into stopping myself from saying sorry. And I've replaced it. I might have mentioned it on the podcast before, but I've started saying thank you instead, trying to say thank you. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for understanding, all those things. And it's made a huge difference. I rarely say I'm sorry anymore in business. But what I realized this weekend is I say it in my family life. And in my social life more than I realized. Somehow I was thinking about it last weekend when I was with friends, and that I'm still saying I'm sorry a little bit more than I wish I was. But it really showed me how just making a conscious effort towards thinking about it made a difference, and it's true for a lot of things in our life.
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of thinking about what compels me. Let's use me as the example here. What compels me to say that I'm sorry? And I realize it's a little bit, and I think it's true for a lot of people who over apologize. You're not really sorry. It's like or oh, or let me think about that for a minute. Except the words that come out of your mouth are sorry.
Right.
I think for a lot of people, it's just a way of softening the engagement with the other person. But depending on who you're talking to, it can land like a sorry. I'm a piece of dog meat, and walk all over me, please. So that's a strategy I use. I always feel bad about not immediately replying to emails or texts, and it's a practice to say thanks for your patience with me getting back to you.
Right.
Because I don't want to say, oh, sorry. I hate leading an email with sorry. And interpersonally, I think it's really interesting when that comes up.
And also knowing when to use it correctly. So I did drop the ball on something last week, and I wrote to the person, I apologize for overlooking, because I really was sorry. I really felt that it warranted it, but it was very intentional. It was not a default situation. Again, this episode's going to drop the day before the election, but I wanted to comment on what I witnessed this week in a interview. Kamala Harris did an interview on Fox, which was fascinating and just interesting in their exchange. But she, at one point, said to the interviewer, "I'm sorry, and with all due respect." And I heard that. I heard the I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but I think it was appropriate at the time. And I know she wasn't sorry.
Right.
But I know I could understand why she used those words to diffuse the situation, to soften the edges of it, so then she could get in what she really needed to say. So she kind of came in soft, which I think is a strategy sometimes. But I just, because I'm so conscious of the word I'm sorry, it's like, first it was like, why are you saying you're sorry? And then it was like, oh, I kind of get it. I kind of get it. It was to diffuse so that she could really get in the point that she was making. Yeah. Otherwise, he might have interrupted. He might have come in and interrupted again. Which go into
that's a really great observation. I didn't actually see that particular part of it. I've seen clips. I haven't watched the whole thing. But my sense was that she was trying to complete a sentence. And she had to sort of manage the situation. And so that's a really interesting strategic use of sorry. And then, of course, we know what with all due respect means. Yeah. We can translate that.
Maybe we'll do that as a little topic in our second season.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Anyway. So why don't we dive in, Juliet? We talked a little bit about what we wanted to cover in this recap episode of the season. Yep. And I thought a really good place to start would be, look at this, here we are. I think in June, or maybe it was in May, we talked about, let's do a podcast. We'll call it Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. And here we are, having finished a whole season, having interviewed and brought guests and created visuals. So how are you feeling about that? You can tell I'm kind of amazed and proud.
I am very proud. We've done a little bit of research as we've gone through the season, and most people don't finish a first season of a podcast. So I think we're rare in that sense of it. We've had over 250 downloads of episodes, which some might be duplicate people, but I think that to me is, I thought maybe we have 20.
Well, and let's put that in context. That is 250 downloads of only 9 episodes, because as of the recording of episode 11, which this is, we haven't even dropped episode 10 yet.
True. Yes. So that's true. So probably we'll end up with something close to 300, which just to me, it's so exciting. I do want to give a thank you to my brother, Brian, who actually pushed me to reach out to you and for us to make this into a podcast. We talked about this in the first episode, but about doing a book at one point. And I just find this more fun. And
it's so much more dynamic.
Yeah.
But I have to jump in here with this thing. You, I know, are an audiobook person.
I am.
And I am not an audiobook person, although I have occasionally listened to books on audio. What I find is that they don't stick with me quite as well as the written word. So I know that about myself. If I really want to remember something or engage with it, I need to actually see it, right? There's something about that.
I think that's true. I mean, that's what they've done in studies, and they've realized that.
And I think people are different. So part of me is like, this is our book. And then another part of me is, no, this is the outline for our book, because there's still a population that listens to this, learns things, appreciates it. And we've gotten great feedback from our listeners, in part because we don't hold leadership and some of these big jobs that we and other people have had or have. We don't treat it like it's sacred goods.
Right.
That's part of the myth. There's this myth about it. And we just think it's all really hilarious and fascinating and worthy of devotion and study, but also hilarious, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, that's a very long-winded way of saying, I think we still have a book, but season 1 is really something I think to be really proud of. And yes, thank you, Brian. I know you're listening.
Yes. Yes.
Did you imagine, Juliet, when you and your brother said, we're going to do this, that we'd be here wrapping a first season and having plans for a second.
No, and I mean, I have to say thank you to you who had experience in podcasting, but also this would not have been as much fun doing by myself. I mean, it's been a blast, and I don't think boring, at least to me. And I might have felt like it was boring if it was like me interviewing. So I think when you have a partner, the dynamics change so much, and your mood and their mood and all plays together with the guest, as opposed to kind of trying to follow a similar format every single time and asking the same questions. And I think it just is more interesting. So thank you for being a good partner.
Oh, thank you. I think one of the things one of my big lessons for 2024, and Lord help us, it's not over yet, is my need as a thinker and a doer to be in collaboration, to be part of a team or a group. And it makes such a difference to how I show up to my work. So thank you.
And it's also, it's also being accountable to somebody else as a solopreneur. When we work on something together, I feel much more obligated to get on it and get it done. And so anyway.
Sorry, not sorry, but you're obligated, Juliet.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So I think what we wanted to do in this is kind of recap what we learned. That was the intention of the podcast, was to help demystify, as you noted, and to just talk to leaders about how they got where they are and their philosophies, and how what they've learned can be helpful to people who are aspiring to the C-suite or new to the C-suite or feeling stale in the C-suite, which is kind of all of our other practices that we work on.
So Juliet and I chatted, of course, before the show, so that we were somewhat prepared, even though it's Sunday morning and we're fuzzy. We pulled out three. That's such the wrong number. 7. We pulled out 7 themes that are either explicitly or implicitly addressed across all of the episodes. And the first one, which holds true for both Juliet and me in our corporate careers, is that leadership opportunities can be accidental, but the leadership is this intersection of who you are and the way you show up in the world in response to circumstances, right? So our guest, Mark Cedarborg, one of the questions was, did you ever imagine yourself being a CEO? And he's like, no, never in his wildest dreams did he think about being a CEO. But opportunities kept presenting. And he's an extraordinary leader and shows that regardless of what positions he's been in, but the circumstances created that. So
I think too, we had a little bit of that with Beth, Beth Kober, because she also had to say yes to things that came her way. Maybe it wasn't accidental, but it was, when leadership opportunities come up, even if you didn't imagine that, or it wasn't something you aspired to, that saying yes is part of the process. It's part of stepping forward instead of standing where you are or taking a step backwards. It's really stepping into those opportunities. And, for me, I've had so many great opportunities that were accidental, but also when I look back on it, I realized that it was because people had confidence in me and what I had to offer, sometimes before I had confidence in myself, which I think is also part of what what leadership is.
Yeah, and to me, this thread pulls me right back around to us starting and sticking with a podcast and now wrapping a full season, which is the power of the doing. Like each step that you take or repeat or commit to reinforces sort of an internal structure. Like you get better at showing up each time you do it. So I'm correlating that leadership lesson to just the doing of the podcast. But in fact, it's true. The first opportunity you say yes to then prepares you for the next opportunity that you either choose or call out, or that lands on your doorstep.
That's true. That's really, I was thinking about a client of mine who conveys her fears. She starts with her fears, and I'm trying to get her to, fake it till you make it kind of thing. I get that it's scary, but if you keep leading with your fears and what you're afraid of, you're not going to take that step. And just in this conversation, it's making me realize that I have to do a little bit more work on her. But for me, what I've learned is that confidence leads to competence. And so if you're conveying yourself as not being confident, people won't think that you're competent. Because if you're not able to promote yourself, and you are talking about what you're afraid of, people aren't going to think that you know what you're doing. And again, a lot of us don't know what we're doing because we're doing things for the first time, or we've never done it before. But the confidence is what's going to get you into those opportunities, and having the confidence that you can figure it out.
Right. And I think you've really nailed something that I think is worth articulating. First of all, it's a sort of a multi-layered conversation between what I think of as self-doubt and self-belief, and competence and confidence, and how they interplay with each other. I think everybody carries around a basket, a bag over your shoulder, a backpack, metaphor of choice, of self-doubt. And I actually think it's really authentic to own that piece of it, to be upfront with certain people in certain circumstances that you're not sure, that part of you feels that doubt. On the other hand, when that doubt gets in the way of you moving forward and taking action, then not only do you reinforce your own self-doubt, but the world sees that you're not moving forward. And I think it all depends on your audience. I mean, there are places and times in the corporate world where if you let any sign of vulnerability shine through, you'll get run over. Yeah. Right. And I think we can all sort of feel in our bones what that's been like for us as leaders. But there's a really interesting interplay in there, because self-doubt is, everybody has it, and most people are faking that they don't have it. And that's an interesting choice when we're also talking about authentic leadership.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. I mean, I think that expressing self-doubt with confidence, though, that you can figure it out. I have to tell you that I have used the evidence bank quite a bit with clients, and since we had that discussion at one of the podcasts, I really like it because it's super helpful when people are feeling that self-doubt. I've never done this before, but it's like, well, let's talk about when you have done something that you've never done before and gotten through it and was successful, and so it's really helpful. So.
Yeah, it's the power of data.
Yep.
Right? The fact that it's your own data doesn't make it less powerful. And I think what's really true about being able to look at the things that you have done as a person, as a leader, whatever, is that it directly countermands. I want to use that word, and then I'm wondering, what does that word even mean? It refutes the theme that says, I don't know what I'm doing. I will never know what I'm doing. It's that never know that absolute black and white thinking that is the nemesis of anybody, because the world is full of nuance, right? So when you get into a place where you're feeling it'll never go my way, or I will never know what I'm doing, it reminds you that you've done hard things before and that you've figured it out. And already a couple times in this episode, Juliet, you said, and I really want to underscore this, I may not know exactly what to do now, but I do know I can figure it out. It's that learning and taking the lessons and applying oneself to figure things out that, to me, is one of the hallmarks of really great leadership, of really great performance, right? Because you've got to be learning as you go. And I think a lot of times, another myth to break, there's this myth that we have to know what we're doing and have confidence that that's what we're leading with, as opposed to I'm leading with my ability to figure things out.
Right.
And you've said that. And so I want to, that's what you've been saying. And I think it's really worth underscoring.
Agree.
Yeah. So we already hit a couple of the 7. So leadership opportunities can be accidental, saying yes to what shows up. One of the things that when we were talking to Scott was trust the process. He's the recruiter.
Absolutely.
And both of us took from that call like, oh, sometimes I forget to trust the process that I've set in motion, or that I with you have set in motion, and really having a little bit of both faith and patience that things unfold because we're showing up to it, and it's not always about pushing the rock up the hill.
It's so funny because I think about when I was getting to the end of one assignment with a client, and I knew it was going to end, and I wanted it to end. I was ready, but I had nothing substantial to take its place, and I was starting to have a panic attack about, did I make the right choice? Should I be doing my own business right now? And I knew that I had, but there was all this doubt in there. Mm-hmm. And then within a week of that mini panic attack, I was fully booked. I had 3 different clients come my way within that week. And now, things are rolling with those 3 clients, and just how funny that was. And it was right around the time that we talked to Scott, and just learning to trust the process, not just in recruiting, but in just life of, I listened to a great podcast. Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a great podcast called Wiser Than Me. And I forget who the guest was, but they said, don't waste a worry on that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that same theme of energy that you put into worrying and things you can't control is wasted.
Yeah.
It's just wasted energy, and put that into enjoying a day off because you don't have a client, because, it will come.
Yeah. There's work, and then there's worrying about work. And sometimes it feels like they're the same thing, doesn't it?
That's true.
I just want to call out for our listeners. Scott is Scott Miller, who the person we're referring to is Scott Miller. And he's episode 6. If you haven't heard that, you can go back and listen to that. I want to also talk about a theme that came through so loudly in so many of our episodes, some rather explicitly, which is this notion of not asking for permission. How does that land for you, Juliet, when you hear stop asking for permission?
Well, I think it's, it is along the lines of sorry, not sorry in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it was tactical in our conversation. So for instance, you have a doctor's appointment at 3:30 on Thursday. You don't ask, can I go to the doctor? You say, I'm going to be out of the office at 3:30 on Thursday. That was one of the themes of don't ask permission. When, start owning your agency within your role.
Yep.
And know that if you are good at your job and doing your job in the right ways and delivering, that, you don't need to ask for permission to have a life and have that balance that we've talked about. There's that piece of it. And then there's also a piece of it that is being unapologetic and saying, this is who I am. I have faith in who I am. I don't need to ask, especially, let's say the patriarchy, to say that it's okay to be myself in these situations, and that showing up authentically and showing up without apology is super important and a great trait of leadership.
And it's so hard.
So hard.
It's so hard. I think Juliet, that I posted on LinkedIn and Instagram a rant about feedback that some executives give their direct reports. You need to develop more executive presence. And I just am so tired of hearing that.
Right.
Because it's always like, what does that look like? Does it like you want me to show up like you?
Right.
And that's the lesson that many of us take from being told executive presence needs a little bit where you're either too rough or you're not rough enough, or, and sometimes it just gets down to, I show up authentically and I have a lot of power, and that doesn't feel quite right to you. And so you're asking me to, I don't know, massage my executive presence, which is different than get some. Right. Anyway, I've gone on that rant of, first of all, it's just not helpful feedback. It doesn't offer person-specific guidance, and usually isn't about them being more fully themselves in a powerful and generative way. It's somehow about editing themselves. So it's a tricky dance, isn't it?
It's really tricky. And I think there's part of it is read the room. So what was coming up for me when you were talking about that, read the room is my new favorite term. But when you were talking about that and thinking about where you worked, where you came from in your corporate life, and how traditionally corporate that world was and is probably still, but how working is changing. And I think we talked a bit about this with Sonali in what episode that was. I don't have that. 8. Good one. But we talked, thank you. We talked about, her being young in becoming a leader, and the way that she showed up was not traditional corporate showing up. And she did get some of that kind of feedback. I don't think exactly that feedback, but that kind of feedback of how she should show up. And I think, back to being unapologetic, she continued to show up in her best way, which was not traditionally corporate.
Right.
And I have had that experience as well. Being in nonprofit, you get a lot of, the edges are softened in that world. And there's a lot of allowance for people to show up authentically and be themselves in a lot of them, not all of them. But I do think that leaders now need to start paying attention to developing a culture that allows for people to be themselves. And I think Melissa talked a lot about that. And that episode will be dropping on October 21st, which is tomorrow. But she does talk a lot about that, just deciding that she was going to be herself. And that meant things were not always clean and tidy. And I really like that. And I think that the future leadership is going to require some softening of those traditional corporate ways of being.
Yeah, structures and ways of working the room or reading
suits
the room
and ties
not.
and
exactly.
I was thinking,
I think it's one of the ironies actually that's come out of the pandemic is that the remote workforce. I mean, we all joke about I got dressed up for work from the waist up, right? I'm wearing my pajama bottoms because you can't see that when you're on a Zoom like we are today, right? There was that opportunity to be remote working, and now for more and more people, hybrid and semi back in the office, and that's still kind of evolving. I think that actually cracked open some ways of showing up that look and feel different because you're not in the same room with the people that you work with.
And developing your presence, your Zoom presence has been really important. I'm trying to remember to put some earrings on and make sure my hair is a little bit, rulier than normal. But I think that also when people start going back to the office, what that's going to look like is going to be very different. And it's because of the next generation doesn't have that construct. Right. They just don't. And I'm glad. I'm really glad.
Yeah.
I think the work is going to be better.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I have hope.
There's one theme that we've sort of danced around but haven't called out explicitly, and that's relentless optimism.
Yeah.
Which, I think a really interesting one, especially when it's mirrored with authentic leadership, authentic leadership, and also this question of self-belief, right? That you can have relentless optimism even in the face of your own self-doubts or your own worries or your own, reading the room and not being sure about where things go. But I think all the people that we had on our season this season, sorry, I'm really word salading this today, have sort of inherent relentless optimism. They are people who just keep showing up energetically with a positive outlook. And I know that they don't always feel positive about everything, but that's their default, their go-to. Am I saying that right, Juliet? What do you think?
You are. And I don't think that's an accident. It was a happy accident in a way, but I think we chose people from our worlds to ask to be on the podcast. And underlying that is probably because we like the way they show up, and even Melissa, who is the one person that neither of us knew before we recorded, just the way that she shows up in her worlds, LinkedIn, and was really attractive to me. And that's why I reached out to her and asked her. So I think that will probably continue just because we are optimistic people for the most part. I mean, we've seen each other not be optimistic, but we present as optimistic and we try to live there. And so I think that's something that you have to have. Again, it is an underlying thing to all of it. Is if you don't believe it and don't believe that it could be better or well done, or that you can face things that are scary and get out of it unscathed or relatively unscathed, that you're not going to likely be that successful in leadership.
Right. And you might not even choose the path.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So let me just take a quick minute and run through those 7 for our audience. And then I think it would be really fun to pivot to season 2 and what we're thinking about.
Yeah. Let's do
so
it.
For those of you listening at home and taking notes, the 7 themes are: leadership opportunities can be accidental, but impactful, that it's an intersection of who you are in response to circumstances. There is a theme of relentless optimism in the leaders that we have spoken with and who we admire. Authentic leadership, being truly yourself in positions of authority and in leadership experiences. Not asking for permission, which I think is a big one. It's, as Juliet pointed out, it's the sorry, not sorry equivalent, which is navigating your world without apology or seeking the okay before doing what you know you need to do or want to do. Trusting the process, that's a big one for us control freaks. We don't always trust the process, but it's a good thing to remember. And the last couple of ones are saying yes to what presents, like explicitly choosing the yes rather than the no. And last but not least, of course, is the whole notion of backing yourself, of believing in yourself so that you make choices that support your development and support your contributions as a leader in the world. So those are just 7 out of the 10 episodes that we had. And there's a lot more, but these are the ones that we felt really flowed through all of our discussions with our guests. So Juliet,
Great.
What are we thinking about for season 2?
Well, as we noted a little bit earlier in this episode, we will drop this one the day before the election. The election is on November 5th. If you haven't voted yet and you're listening to this before November 5th, please vote. I think just the whole idea of people sitting out voting, it's a privilege to vote, in my opinion. So anyway,
absolutely.
Out there. Not telling you who to vote for, but I think you can guess that Susan and I lean a certain way, and unapologetically. But what we thought about for season 2, regardless of the outcome of the election, is that we really do want to focus on women leaders. There's so much to learn, and there is, we're looking at our guest list, and we want to expand a little bit outside the C-suite, I think, and bring in maybe some emerging leaders, some folks who wouldn't call themselves a C-suite leader, but who are doing C-suite equal types of leadership. And so that's where we're going with it. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
We've already got one guest booked.
I just want to underscore, Juliet, what you just said, which is we've noticed over the last year, certainly, and as we have another woman running for president against another man who is running for president, that the gender issues, both from a policy perspective as well as the civic fabric of the United States, has been really interesting to follow and to be attentive to. And that's part of why we want to focus this next episode on women in leadership. We always are interested in that, of course, but I think it's because this particular election feels like it's put a real exclamation mark on gender, on obviously bodily autonomy. The whole abortion and choice and pro-life question, I think, is huge. And so we just want to create some space to reconcile. Might be a word that we use. We'll see how season 2 actually goes. But from where I'm sitting now, I just want to continue to have those conversations. And that means that season 2 might be actually a little more political with a lowercase p, right? Talking about what did we learn from the election? What have we learned? Regardless of who gets elected, like we will be responding to whoever makes it to the White House. And I think that's going to be just a really interesting set of conversations.
Yeah. And it's in my opinion, it's time for women to start having greater influence over how things are run, both at the corporate level and the government level. And, I've been thinking a lot about 250 years of this one way and how amazing it is that we have, as a country, have kept that going, which tells you that there's some good pieces of it in there, but it's time for it to evolve in a very different way. And, again, kind of back to the conversation about how people show up in the corporate world is going to change. I think it's just everything needs to change and evolve, and it might need to take a big leap, rather than a small and incremental one. We might need a bigger leap, but we'll see.
Anyway, here we are speculating on our season 2, and maybe we've set the bar really high, and maybe we're just sharing our in-the-moment thoughts about the upcoming election and the aftermath, such as it might be. Yep. And sort of bringing that back to Secrets of the C-Suite, which is really all about leadership and leadership in invisible roles, primarily. So it's, So I guess, is it time to wrap, Juliet?
Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap up the season. Let's wrap up the episode. It has been such a great run. I'm really excited that we accomplished this, and I'm excited that we're going to keep it going, and I'm excited for season 2. And if you haven't listened to the other episodes of season 1, you can get them on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And I just want to thank you, Susan, for a great season.
Yeah, and thank you, Juliet.
We'll be back on January 13th, 2025 with the next season.
Yep. Episode 1 of season 2 of Secrets of the C-Suite. Thanks for listening, everyone. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier.
And the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.